Alright, so I now have a boom arm because I'm a professional. We're going to break down the Craig versus Hitchens cross examination, and I'm going to tell you exactly how Christopher Hitchens got spanked by William Lane Craig. Just watch. I'm going to find a higher quality upload.
Questions for Mr. Hitchens.
All right, let's talk first about whether there are any good arguments to think that atheism is true. Now, it seems to me that you're rather ambivalent here, that you say, you redefine atheism to mean a sort of atheism or non-theism.
That's what it means.
But how do you distinguish then the different varieties of non-theism? For example, what is normally called atheism, agnosticism, or the view of verificationists that the statement God exists is simply meaningless?
So that's a very good question. You'll realize when you get into debates with atheists that they are like slippery, slick fish. It's hard to catch them. It's hard to, pin them down and tell exactly what their worldview is. So what Craig is basically asking here, what exactly are you? Are you an agnostic, atheist? And I'll like Hitchens' answer, but his answer leaves a lot of questions, so let's play it. That's not what I meant to do.
Well, I mean, there are different schools of atheism, as you say, but there's no claim I know how to make that says atheism is true, because atheism is the statement that a certain proposition isn't true. So I wish you'd get this bit right, because it's there you go again.
Well,
I just devoted a little time to this. I said it is not in itself a belief or a system. It simply says you can get by better, probably, we think, without the assumption that no one who wants you to worship a god has ever been able to come up with a good enough reason to make you do it.
now,
So, his answer here is a bit odd, because he says it isn't a belief, and no one has given him good enough reason to believe the proposition God exists. But the issue with that is, that in no way leaves you with atheism. That would leave you with traditional agnosticism. That would just leave you as an agnostic, right? But atheism, this is what Craig was trying to say. He's redefining atheism as non-theism as opposed to just a blanket statement that God does not exist. And it's a bit odd. He's an atheist with the privilege of the agnostic of just saying, well, I don't believe the other side's very convincing, without providing any argument himself. It's a basic principle in philosophy that the burden of proof is on anyone who makes a claim. Hitchens is making a claim by saying God does not exist, as Craig's making a claim that God does exist, but Hitchens isn't really providing any evidence for his claim. The evidence he's provided in that response would merely leave you as an agnostic. Continue playing it.
Now, so the point is, though, that on your definition of atheism or non-theism, it really embodies a diversity of views, such as agnosticism, what is normally called atheism, or this verificationism. Now, which of those do you hold to within this umbrella of atheism? Are you an atheist who asserts the proposition God does not exist, or do you simply withhold belief in God in the way the agnostic does?
So Craig's doing a very good job of pushing this point, because for Craig to really make his argument... So Craig's doing a really good job of pushing this point.
Right. On some days, I'm a greater. I'm not going to do you that much of a favour. On some days, I'm a great admirer of Thomas Huxley, who had the great debate with Bishop Wilberforce in Oxford at the Natural History Museum about Darwinism in the mid 19th century, who was known as Darwin's bulldog. We would now say Darwin's pit bull, and who completely trounced the good bishop. But I can't thank him for inventing the term agnostic. And I can't thank him for some of his social Darwinist positions either, some of which are rather unattractive.
I need an answer to this. My time is fleeting.
But because I think agnosticism is evasive. To me, yes. If you talk about the power of the Holy Spirit and so forth, to me that is meaningless. It's to me. I'm sorry. I've tried. It's white noise. It's like saying there is only one God and Allah is His messenger. It's gibberish to me. There are many of us. I'm sorry. There are just many of us of whom this is the case. It may be true. It is true.
Okay, Mr. Hitchens, I got to press you here again because time is leaving.
Feel free.
What is?
Yeah, I mean, to me, in my personal opinion, Hitchens is just wasting time here because remember it's timed. Craig only has 6 minutes. Hitchens is gonna have 6 minutes as well. The rant he just went on didn't answer the question at all. It didn't progress. It wasn't a progression to the answer. I think he was wasting time personally.
Your view exactly.
Press away.
Do you affirm God does not exist, or do you simply won't believe
once
in?
I have said that I've never seen any persuasive evidence for the existence of something, and I've made real attempts to study the evidence presented and the arguments presented, that I will go as far as to say, have the nerve to say, that it does not therefore exist, except in the minds of its.
Okay. So this is important. Remember, in his first response, he says he doesn't really hold to a belief, but what he just said is a belief. So it's a bit confusing, isn't it? I mean, he either doesn't believe what he just said, or he lied before. He just doesn't know what he believes. I mean, or he doesn't know what his worldview is, I should say. I'm just not sure what to think about Hitchens, because, I mean, surely he's done enough research and put enough time into it to be able to answer that question better. I mean, he did like 3 minutes of talking to a question that could have been answered in a few words. Either, well, I think God doesn't exist, or God may or may not exist, which would leave him as an agnostic. But his answer right there would leave him as an atheist. So now, Craig's going to ask a good question.
Except in the Henry Jamesian subjective sense that you say of it being so real to some people in their own minds that it counts as a force in the world, yes.
Okay, so you do affirm then that God does not exist. Now, what I want to know, and do you have any justification for that?
I think I've come unwired in some horrible way.
You're fine.
You sure?
Do you have any arguments?
Look at his facial expression. He's definitely wasting time. And I don't understand why I'm going to say this. He's getting pressed right now. I'm not sure why. I mean, these are very simple questions. I mean, this leaves me a bit confused at how Frank Turek, although I think he won in terms of arguments, why he got babied by Hitchens in his debate. I guess when you actually are able to pin down Hitchens, because Hitchens' rhetoric is amazing. I believe he has the best rhetoric out of any atheist I've ever heard. But at the core, his arguments aren't very good. So, it's good to see that someone debating him can actually pin him down and drop my pen, nullify his rhetoric, and just leave him with his arguments, which is what's happening right now when Hitchens is floundering,
leading to the conclusion that God does not exist.
Well, I would rather. I think I'm wondering if I'm boring anybody now. I would rather say. I'd rather state it in reverse and say I find all the arguments in favour to be fallacious or unconvincing. And I'd have to add that though this isn't my reason for not believing in it, that I would be very depressed if it was true. But that's a quite different thing. I don't say of atheism that it's at all morally superior. That would be very risky. I wouldn't admit that it was at all morally inferior either, but we can at least be acquitted on the charge of wishful thinking.
I wonder if that's...
So, again, that answer right there would leave him as an agnostic. I don't see how that claim leads to atheism.
The case, would you agree that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence?
Well, I'm not sure that I would agree.
Okay. Let's turn to the moral argument and talk about that a little bit. I think you've misunderstood the moral argument.
Given the stakes, Doctor, sorry. Given the stakes, we're not talking about unicorns. or tooth fairies or leprechauns here. We're talking about an authority that would give other human beings the right to tell me what to do in the name of God. So for a claim like that, if there's no evidence for it, it seems to me not a small question.
No, it's certainly not a small question. But
As you're making a very, very, very large claim, your evidence had better be absolutely magnificent, it seems to me. And it's the lack of magnificence, I think, that...
And I think, okay, he can say that. I think that's fair. That's probably the best answer he's given this whole entire time. But the problem is, that doesn't leave you as an atheist. That leaves you as an agnostic. That in no way proves atheism. If you just, okay, let's say you're neutral, right? You don't know anything. Okay, Christianity, or, no. Does God exist? Okay, the arguments are bad. No, okay. You're an agnostic. You now need to provide arguments for why atheism is true, which Hitchens is failing to do. So he is giving the answers an agnostic would give, despite claiming God does not exist and he's an atheist.
It began to strike me first.
One final question, John.
Okay, well, let's go to the moral argument. It seems to me there that you've misunderstood the argument in that we're looking for an objective foundation for the moral values and duties that we both, I think, want to affirm. It's not a matter of whether or not we can know what is right and wrong, or that we need God to tell us what is right and wrong. It's rather that we need to have some sort of an objective foundation for right and wrong. Wouldn't you agree on your view? It's simply the sociobiological spin-offs of the evolutionary process, and that therefore these do not provide any sort of objective foundation for moral values and duties.
That could be true, yes. That could
Okay.
well be true. Yeah, I don't want to be too much of a reductionist, but it's entirely possible that it is purely evolutionary and functional. One wants to think that there's a bit more to one's love for the fellow creature than that. But it doesn't add one iota of weight or moral gravity to the argument to say, but that's because I don't believe in a supernatural being. It's a non sequitur.
Mr. Hitchens,
So I think Hitchens gave a good answer there. Yeah, the moral values could just be evolutionary spin-off on his worldview. Most atheists, it's pretty annoying to hear atheists try to make the argument about morals. This is right, this is wrong, we have objective moral values, when there's absolutely no grounding for it on their worldview. It's a bit shocking. I mean, it's a pretty simple concept. As an atheist, you cannot have objective moral values because your worldview does not allow for it. A lot of atheists have accepted that. A lot haven't. The ones who haven't are in denial.
questions for Dr. Craig?
Well, I'd like to know first, you said the career of Jesus of Nazareth involved the ministry of miracles and exorcisms. When you say exorcism, do you mean that you believe in devils too?
What I meant there was that most historians agree that Jesus of Nazareth practiced miracle working and he practiced exorcisms. I'm not committing myself, nor are historians committing themselves to the reality of demons, but they are saying that Jesus did practice exorcism and practiced healing.
So I find it a bit odd. This is Hitchens' first question. So if you can see at the top left, yes, you can. Does God exist? That's the topic of the debate. To immediately jump into Jesus is a bit odd, because contrary to what many atheists believe, if you were to disprove every single religion, that would not leave you with the conclusion God doesn't exist. There's something called atheism, they believe God exists but hasn't revealed himself. They're a-religious, but they do believe God exists. So simply, like I said, if you were to disprove every religion, wouldn't matter. It wouldn't be the topic of this debate. Now, it is true that Craig did mention Jesus in his speeches, but it wasn't the main point of his argument. It was far from it. He brought up the kalam, he brought up the moral argument, he brought up the fine-tuning argument, etc. The section about Jesus was very, very small compared to the rest. So for Hitchens to pick out this little small part that even if he were to completely destroy Craig on this point, it wouldn't affect Craig's argument at all, really, because his argument's founded on the Kalam, moral, and fine-tuning arguments. Maybe more. I forgot which other one. I forgot if he said more. But those are the big three.
So you believe that Jesus of Nazareth caused devils to leave the body of a madman and go into a flock of pigs that hurled themselves down the Gadarene slopes into the sea?
Do I believe that's historical? Yes.
Right. That would be sorcery, wouldn't it, though?
No, it would be an illustration of Jesus' ability to command even the forces of darkness, and therefore an illustration of the sort of divine authority that he was able to command and exercise. This, as I say, is illustrative of this unprecedented sense of divine authority that Jesus of Nazareth had, that he even could command the forces of darkness and that they would obey. So whether you think he was a genuine exorcist or that he merely believed himself to be an exorcist, what is historically undeniable is that he had this radical sense of divine authority, which he expressed by miracle working and exorcisms.
Right.
Good
and
answer.
You believe he was born of a virgin?
Yes, I believe that as a Christian. I couldn't claim to prove that historically. That's not part of my case tonight. But I as a Christian, I believe that.
Yeah, so, quick point about that. A lot of atheists like to point to things like Noah's Ark, the virgin birth, etc. as ways of disproving God or Christianity. The basis of Christianity is Jesus' resurrection. We believe in things like the virgin birth by faith. So to target this is target the virgin birth is to completely miss the foundation. If you're going to be an atheist and you're going to argue against Christian or an agnostic or an atheist or a Muslim, actually, any worldview that's not Christianity, if you want to disprove Christianity, you're going to have to tackle the resurrection. Tackling things like the virgin birth, etc., these are straw men. The resurrection, and I believe, as my video series showed, I believe Jesus' resurrection can be proven historically.
And I know you believe in the resurrection, but
Yes, and for that, I think that we have good evidence.
as a matter of biblical, what shall we call it, consistency, it's said in one of the Gospels that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves of Jerusalem were opened, and all the tenants of the graves walked the streets and greeted their old friends. It makes the resurrection sound rather a commonplace in the greater Jerusalem area.
It says, that's in the Gospel of Matthew, and that's actually attached to a crucifixion narrative.
That's what I said. It says at the time of the crucifixion.
Yes, that's right. At the time of the crucifixion, it says that there were appearances of Old Testament saints in Jerusalem at the time. This is part of Matthew's description of the crucifixion scene.
Do you believe that?
I don't know whether Matthew intends this to be apocalyptic imagery or whether he means this to be taken literally. I've not studied it in any depth, and I'm open-minded about it. I'm willing to be convinced one way or the other.
Again, another odd question from Hitchens. What's the point? I don't see... Every single question Hitchens has asked has not forwarded atheism. It may forward disproving Christianity, although I don't think he's done anything in that regard, but even if, like I said, even if he were to be successful in this section of cross-examination and completely destroy Craig, disprove Christianity somehow, it wouldn't leave you with atheism. And the topic of the debate is, does God exist?
See, the reason I'm pressing you is this because, we know from Scripture that the pharaohs, the magicians, could produce miracles. In the end, Aaron could outproduce them. But what I'm suggesting to you is even if the laws of nature can be suspended and great miracles can be performed, it doesn't prove the truth of the doctrine of the person who's performing them. Or would you not agree to that?
Not necessarily. I think that's right.
So somebody could be casting out devils from pigs, and that wouldn't prove he was the Son of God.
I think that's right. In fact, there were Jewish exorcists. The only point that I was trying to make there was that this was illustrative of the kind of divine authority that Jesus claimed, especially since he didn't cast them out in God's name, where he didn't perform miracles by praying to God. He would do them in his own authority. So that Jesus exercised an authority that was simply unheard of at that time, and for which he was eventually crucified because it was thought to be blasphemous.
Alright, so that's a good point right there. Jesus did it on his own authority as opposed to, say, a Jewish exorcist who does it in the name of God. And that's a key point, because a lot of atheists like to point to something like, let's say, Lazarus being resurrected. They say, well, Lazarus got resurrected, that doesn't mean he's the son of God. When you think about it, in context, that counter is so stupid, because, so first of all, Jesus resurrected Lazarus. So, if you want to use that, then you're kind of presupposing that Jesus can raise people from the dead, but whatever. Think about the context. Lazarus was just a guy, in the grand scheme of things. Jesus was an accused blasphemer of God. He was crucified. He was cursed by being hung to a tree, essentially hung to a tree, by his crucifixion, all of these things. And God raised that guy, the blasphemer. So I think things, when you take it into context, things like this type of argument where you say, well, what Jesus did was done by other people rose from the dead, other people healed the sick, other people blah, blah, blah. These type of arguments don't really work because of the context of how Jesus did it.
Well, it was thought to be blasphemous to claim to be the Messiah, to be exact. I mean, the people who got the closest look at him, the Jewish Sanhedrin, thought that his claims were not genuine. So remember, if you're resting anything on eyewitnesses, the ones who we definitely know were there thought he was bogus. But, okay, I think I've got a rough idea, assuming you make that assumption of his pre-existing divinity, that it's a presuppositionalist case, I can see what you're driving at.
Well, no, I'm not a presuppositionalist.
I've got another question for you, which is this. How many religions in the world do you believe to be false?
I don't know how many religions in the world there are, so I
Well,
can't.
could you name... Right. Fair enough. I'll see if I can't narrow that down. That was a clumsily asked question, I admit. Do you regard any of the world's religions to be false?
Excuse me?
Do you regard any of the world's religions to be false preaching?
Yes, I think, yeah, certainly.
Would you name one then?
Islam.
That's quite a lot.
Pardon me?
That's quite a lot.
Yes.
Do you think it's moral to preach false religion?
No.
So religion is responsible for quite a lot of wickedness in the world right there.
Certainly.
Right.
I'd be happy to concede that. I would agree with that.
So if I was a baby being born in Saudi Arabia today, would you rather I was me or a Wahhabi Muslim?
Would I be? You'd rather be?
Would you rather it was me? It was an atheist
What's
baby
the
or
point?
a Wahhabi baby?
Good source of comedy.
I don't have any preference as to whether you would.
Very good. As bad as that. Okay. Are there any? Sorry, I've only got a few seconds. It's a serious question. I shouldn't squander it. Are there any Christian denominations you regard as false?
Certainly.
Could I know what they are?
Well, I'm not a Calvinist, for example. I think that certain tenets of Reformed theology are incorrect. I would be more in the Wesleyan camp myself. But these are differences among brethren. These are not differences on which we need to put one another in some sort of a cage. So within the Christian camp, there's a large diversity of perspectives. I'm sure there are views that I hold that are probably false. But I'm trying my best to get my theology straight, trying to do the best job, but I think all of us would recognize that none of us agree on every point of Christian doctrine, on every dot and tittle.
Before Mr. Hitchens succeeds in launching another series of...
All right, so that's the end of cross-examination. So, as one atheist website put it, Hitchens got spanked. That's exactly what happened. Hitchens completely failed in cross-examination. He gets no points at all. Craig gets all the points, really. I mean, he basically exposed that Hitchens either doesn't know what his worldview is, or it changes second by second, etc. Hitchens, I mean, what was the point of the questions he asked? let's say Craig had a terrible answer for each and every single one of them, it would not disprove God's existence, which is the topic of this debate. So, I think this is a good representation of the new atheists. This is the type of stuff they do. This is similar to what Sam Harris does. This is probably how Richard Dawkins would argue against Craig if he wasn't a complete coward. You know, this, that, and the third.